welcome to this week's video. Now last week I made a video about the history of the Telecaster, and while I was preparing for that video I thought I'll do a bit of research. I mean it's not really research, I'm just looking up facts. And I thought rather than using just Google searches like I normally do, I'd use ChatGPT because I thought this is a factual video. This is going to sort of lay it all out and maybe I can get it to script it slightly for me. Anyway, in the process of doing this, I discovered that ChatGPT doesn't know what it's talking about. When it comes to guitars, it talks total rubbish half the time. So before I get on to showing you what a load of old rubbish ChatGPT spat out about guitars for me, I'm just going to show you a little clip from last week's video. It's these history videos. I'm going to do some more. They're kind of prompted by this new show that I'm doing called The Guitar Through Time, and I'm playing all these different types of guitars, playing songs that are famously played on these guitars by players that are famous for playing these guitars, and I go through from like the 50s up to about the 80s. Anyway, the one last week was about the Telecaster, so let me show you a little clip of me playing the Telecaster at this show. This was The Guitar Through Time, and this was as a kind of Sun medley, a bit like the Danny Gatton one, doing some Elvis songs. So let's have a look at this ChatGPT. The first thing, this isn't in any particular order, I thought it was a sort of famous Telecaster players that, you know, from different eras, just to highlight the sort of versatility of the instrument. And one of them was Bruce Springsteen, because that's my latest obsession. Now, as I say, I know quite a lot about these guitars anyway, being a bit of a nerd, and I knew that it was his Telecaster is actually an Esquire Telecaster hybrid. Actually, it's got a Esquire neck, which is what it says Esquire on there, but it's a Telecaster body. And when he bought it, he got it from a music shop and they bought it off a session guitarist who apparently routed it all out under the scratch plate, and had 4 pickups fitted with 4 separate outputs. So when he went into a studio to do a session, he'd have 4 separate outputs, play the solo once, it would get recorded 4 times, so he'd get paid 4 times the amount. Very clever idea, but it meant that this guitar was quite unique because it's meant to be very light because it's got all this stuff routed out to have the 4 pickups, and you can see from the cover of Born to Run, you can see this sort of weird pickup setup on it. And anyway, more latterly, he then got it sort of set back to a kind of more Telecaster format with the Telecaster pickups, and that's kind of how it stayed. I found articles outlining this. I think there might have been an article on the Fender website talking about it, but you know, if you go through and you manually do this, you can find all these sort of facts. I guess they're facts, or they're as much as you can think they're facts. If you find them in several different places, you think, well, that's probably the most reliable bit of information. But ChatGPT doesn't seem to do that. So this was the information that is spat out the first time, and sort of most of it seems reasonable. You know, I'm not sure it's quite got it exactly right about the Esquire Telecaster thing, but then I looked down and it says gauge of strings, he uses 11s. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if he does. I'll check that against something else. So first thing I thought was I'll type into ChatGPT, what gauge strings does Bruce Springsteen use? And this is what came back, and it completely and utterly contradicts itself. That he might use Dean Markley 10s, or he might use Ernie Ball 10s, or he might even use D'Addarios, but they don't know which gauge. Even ChatGPT, within its own kind of way it works, is giving me 2 completely contradictory pieces of information. So I thought I'd just do a general Google search, and then nowadays Google comes up with that little AI generated bit at the beginning. And interestingly, next to a picture of Bruce Springsteen playing his Telecaster, which is really the guitar he's famous for. I mean, if you look really hard, you can probably find a picture of him playing different guitars, but on this particular little bit of AI generated text, it tells me that on his Strats he uses 11s, and on the Jazzmaster, which of course we've all seen pictures of him playing, he uses 13s. So there we are. The trouble was, when I first did this, I was kind of taking it at face value, thinking, oh, that's interesting, and writing it all down. and I'll show you the piece of paper if I could find it. But I've written everything down once, and I had to cross it all out when I've actually gone in and looked on these other sources like the Fender website and the Ultimate Guitar, and there's all these other ones which I thought they're bound to be a bit more reliable. At least humans have looked into this. So the next one I'm going to show you, this was Danny Gatton. Now I've got a Danny Gatton custom shop Telecaster. It's here, you can just about see it. So I kind of know what modifications he had on his original Telecaster. When Fender made the version of the Danny Gatton Telecaster, they kind of based it on the modifications he'd done on his original guitar. And as we can see on here, what ChatGPT spat out is that it's apparently got a PAF humbucker in the neck position. It's got a 6 saddle replacement bridge. It's got the control plate reverse, which I know mine hasn't, and a 3-ply mint coloured scratch plate, and it's got a 3rd knob for onboard boost. Now all of those things are completely wrong, and I know where they came from because I'd done another search maybe before or after, and all of those modifications it's talking about are talking about Andy Summers' Telecaster. So as you can see from this, it actually says at the top Danny Gatton's Telecaster, but it's giving me all information about Andy Summers' Telecaster. Doesn't make any sense. And here we are, here's the information about Andy Summers' Telecaster when I asked it about that. Strikingly similar, I think you'll agree. Now I'm going to tell you about the ones that I think are most interesting and that had the most contradictory information. I wanted to ask it about the Telecaster that Jeff Beck used on Blow by Blow. I mean, really, more specifically, it was because we vended as lovers, because I did that in my show. And I knew that he played this modified Telecaster. As I say, I know a lot of this information. I'm just double checking it for detail. I kind of broadly know it, but just checking I've got the information right. So anyway, I typed in there, what Telecaster did Jeff Beck use on Blow by Blow? And it came back with this saying he didn't use a Telecaster on Blow by Blow. He used a Oxblood Les Paul, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, oh, well, I know he did. I mean, there's an article, I found a whole article on it talking about the guitar. It was a 59 Telecaster that Seymour Duncan then added some, I don't think it was from it was a Gibson bridge and the Gibson pickups. I think they came from maybe a Flying V or an Explorer or something. So it was a heavily modified guitar called the Tele Gib. So then I thought I'd ask it more specifically, what was the Telecaster he used on Because We've Ended as Lovers? Because I knew he used the guitar on that one. And typed it in, and again it comes back telling me that he didn't use a Telecaster on Because We've Ended as Lovers. He used the Les Paul again. So I was getting a bit fed up with this. I thought I'm going to ask it what year was the Telecaster that he used on Blow by Blow, and this is what it came back with. It now tells me that he's using a Tele Gib. So just by asking a year rather than generally what Telecaster it was, it finally gives me the information I want. And so I also did like a more general Google search, and Google again generates the AI thing, and I was extremely pleased to see that when I asked it this question, the video that it came up with to illustrate this point was one of my videos. Amazing. I was very pleased about that. I don't know if it comes up with my own videos because it's me doing the search. I don't think it did. I think this probably is the search that would come up if anyone did that. Perhaps you could check that for me and look it up. Anyway, probably not a lot of people looking for that, which is why that video hasn't had millions and millions of views like it obviously should have done. So on to the last one, and this really is my favourite one. I asked it about George Harrison's Telecaster because we did Don't Let Me Down, which the Beatles did on the Apple roof in 1969, and he famously played a Rosewood Telecaster. Now, I asked about the Telecaster that George Harrison played. I asked ChatGPT, and first of all it comes up saying the famous Telecaster that George Harrison used, and it tells me it's an early 50s model that was originally purchased by John Lennon and then sold to George Harrison. It then goes on to tell me that he used a Telecaster on the Ed Sullivan Show. So from my memory, because I actually used this piece of information in my show about when I was playing the Gretsch, because when George Harrison played a Gretsch on the Ed Sullivan Show, Gretsch's sales figures went through the roof. They couldn't keep up with demand. So I thought, well, that's weird. Perhaps he swapped guitars or something. I thought, well, people in those days, they didn't really. They just had one guitar most of the time. So I found these videos. I'm not going to put the sound on or anything, but these 3 videos, I did learn something. I didn't know that the Beatles played on Ed Sullivan 3 times in 1964, all in fairly quick succession, although I think the 3rd one was pre-recorded. And lo and behold, not a sign of a Telecaster. I mean, that's definitely not a Telecaster, is it? That's a Gretsch. Also, ChatGPT then tells me that he used his Rosewood Telecaster. Now, specifically his Rosewood Telecaster, he used that at the Shea Stadium gig in 1965. So I found some photos of the Shea Stadium gig. That doesn't look like a Telecaster to me. Also, I then looked it up. The Rosewood Telecaster, now I found this, I think this was on the Fender website as well. George Harrison was given the prototype of that Fender Telecaster, the Rosewood one, in 1968, which is 3 years after the Shea Stadium gig. ChatGPT also states that George Harrison used a Telecaster in a lot of the early Beatles recordings. Well, I found information contrary to that as well, that the Beatles intentionally didn't use Fender guitars and amps early on to differentiate themselves from a lot of the other bands at the time. Bands like the Shadows, they were all using Fender gear, so the Beatles purposely didn't use the Fender stuff in the early 60s. However, later on they did start to. John Lennon and George Harrison both got given Strats, which apparently they played on Nowhere Man, which I think that's around the Revolver period, so that's about 66, 67, I guess. And then, as I say, he got given this Telecaster in 1968. And if you watch the Let It Be film, or the Get Back film, the one that's on Disney now that's been remastered, George Harrison's playing the Rosewood Telecaster on that. He played it on the roof. And also, you can see on that video, they use the Bass 6, which is a Fender. They use that when Paul's playing piano or guitar. John or George will play the Bass 6. And there's a couple of Fender amps kicking around as well. So they started to use the Fender gear later on, but they didn't use it earlier on. So ChatGPT was completely wrong in that respect. So there we are. Hope you found the video interesting. I just thought, I've got to share this because, you know, when you're looking up things, you want to know about guitars, if you're a guitar nerd, which I guess this channel is aimed at partly, you want to know that you're getting the right information. So don't use ChatGPT, or if you do, double check it, which is what I did. And probably if you put in the right prompts and you get more and more specific, you can get the correct information. But in some ways, I think it's still better trying to find it manually. And then you're bound to eventually get what is hopefully the truth. I mean, a lot of these things, it's all people's memories, so it's not necessarily 100%, but at least you can get as close to the truth as possible. Anyway, I'm going to leave you a bit more Telecastering. From a rehearsal for my show. I showed this bit last week as well. I'm going to show you it again. Check out my website, iamtjwalker.com. I've got listings of when my next shows are coming up. I bring out new videos 7 PM UK time every Friday, so I hope to see you next week.